Imagine the dead of night on the Texas frontier. The only sound is the wind whistling through the tall grass. But then, a flicker of movement in the distance. Not one shadow, but hundreds, detaching from the darkness. They move with an unnatural speed, a silent, deadly wave cresting over the plains. They are the lords of the plains, and they have come for horses, for captives, for blood. For decades, the mere mention of the Apache inspired terror across the Southwest. Their name was a byword for brutal, ghost-like warfare, masters of the ambush and the unforgiving landscape. But another power was rising on the plains, the Comanche, whose mounted fury would forge an empire and challenge the Apache for the title of the most feared warriors in America. So, who was truly more ferocious? For over a century, these two formidable warrior cultures waged a bitter struggle for dominance that pushed both to the absolute limits of warfare. To settle this debate, we have to look at their battlefield tactics, their treatment of captives, and the key conflicts that defined their bloody rivalry. This is the story of a war for control of the American plains. Before the Great Collision, the Apache were a dominant force across the Southwest and parts of the Southern Plains. They weren't a single unified tribe, but a collection of related bands, each adapted to their own territory. Their name, Apache, likely comes from the Zuni word for enemy, a name given by rivals that stuck. Their ferocity was legendary, but it was a ferocity born of the land itself. They were masters of guerrilla warfare, using the rugged mountains and canyons as their fortress. While often imagined as fighting on foot, many Apache groups were actually skilled horsemen by the 17th century, using mounts for raiding and hunting. However, their core tactical genius was often tied to the terrain they knew intimately. An Apache war party could materialize from the rocks, strike with lethal precision, and then vanish, leaving their enemies bewildered and terrified. Their tactics were based on ambush, deception, and endurance. Captives were a part of their warfare, and punishments could be severe, often rooted in rituals of revenge. But they also had a system of integration. Women and children were frequently adopted to replace lost tribe members, a common practice to sustain their numbers. For the Spanish and neighboring tribes, the Apache were a persistent and deadly threat, a force of nature as unpredictable as the land itself. They were masters of their domain, but that domain was about to be invaded. Out of the cold northern Rockies, a new power emerged. Originally part of the Shoshone people, this group moved south onto the Great Plains and discovered the weapon that would change warfare in North America: the horse. They were the Comanche. The Comanche didn't just use horses, they became one with them. They mastered horsemanship to a degree no other tribe could match, learning to ride and fight with unparalleled skill. A Comanche warrior could lean under his horse's neck for a shield while firing a volley of arrows with deadly accuracy. This mastery transformed them from a scattered people into a formidable military culture. Unlike the Apache, whose strength was often tied to rugged terrain, the Comanche became a true light cavalry, capable of covering vast distances with astonishing speed. This power allowed them to dominate the open plains, a landscape where Apache guerrilla tactics were less effective. They didn't just raid for horses, they bred them, building immense herds that became the foundation of their wealth and military might. Their entire way of life shifted to revolve around the horse and hunting the buffalo. Their tactics favored large-scale, coordinated attacks, at times overwhelming enemies with a terrifying charge of hundreds of warriors. Their name, derived from a Ute word, is often translated as enemy or anyone who wants to fight me all the time. By the early 1700s, they stood directly in the way of the Apache. The Comanche expansion into the southern plains wasn't just a migration, it was a brutal war of displacement. They systematically drove Apache groups from the fertile buffalo hunting grounds they had long controlled. On the open plains, the Comanche cavalry was simply too fast and too powerful. One semi-legendary Spanish account tells of a 9-day battle around 1724 that supposedly broke Apache power on the plains, forcing them to retreat west into the mountains and deserts. The vast territory the Apache once roamed became known as Comancheria, the land of the Comanche. The Comanche launched devastating raids on Apache villages, striking at dawn or dusk, killing warriors, and taking women and children. The conflict was a bitter, generations-long war that decimated the Apache population on the plains. Desperate, some Apache bands sought alliances with their old enemies, the Spanish, hoping for protection. This led to one of the most infamous incidents on the frontier. In 1757, the Spanish, at the urging of the Lipan Apaches, built the Mission Santa Cruz de San Saba in what was effectively Comanche territory. The Apache hoped for Spanish protection, and the Spanish hoped to gain a foothold, but the move was seen by the Comanche and their allies as a clear Spanish-Apache alliance against them. In 1758, a massive war party of around 2,000 warriors, primarily Comanche, and allied tribes, descended on the mission, slaughtered its inhabitants, and burned it to the ground, a chilling message to both their enemies. To really understand the ferocity of this conflict, we have to confront one of its darkest aspects: the treatment of captives. For both tribes, taking captives was an integral part of warfare, but their approach and scale differed. Apache raids sometimes resulted in the torture of male enemies, often as a form of ritualized revenge. However, the Apache also had a well-established system of adoption. Captive women and children were often integrated into the tribe, given Apache names, and assimilated to replace family members lost in the constant warfare. This was a crucial survival strategy. The Comanche, on the other hand, developed captive-taking into a larger-scale enterprise that fueled both their economy and their campaigns of terror. Their raids were often designed to capture large numbers of people. Adult male captives frequently faced death by torture, sometimes in horrific public displays meant for the entire camp. The account of Matilda Lockhart, a captive returned to Texans in 1840 covered in scars with her nose burned off, is a harrowing example of the cruelty some captives endured. While some children were adopted and fully integrated, many others were treated as slaves or property. Captives became a commodity to be worked, traded to other tribes, or ransomed for enormous profit. This system created a constant state of fear that stretched from Texas deep into Mexico. So, who was more ferocious? The answer isn't simple, as they represented two different terrifying faces of war. The Apache were undeniable masters of psychological and guerrilla warfare. In the treacherous terrain of their mountain strongholds, they were arguably the more formidable individual fighters, using cunning and an intimate knowledge of the land to ambush and outwit powerful enemies. Their ferocity was that of a cornered predator, tactical, personal, and brutally efficient. The Comanche, however, demonstrated a different, more expansive kind of ferocity, the ferocity of an empire. They waged a war of domination. Their complete mastery of mounted combat allowed them to project power on a scale the Apache couldn't match on the open plains. They didn't just fight battles, they conducted systematic campaigns that permanently altered the human landscape of the southern plains. Their treatment of captives evolved into an organized system of terror, labor, and commerce that destabilized the entire region. While a single Apache warrior was a terrifying opponent in a canyon ambush, a Comanche war party of hundreds of riders descending on a village was a force of destruction, on another level entirely. Therefore, while Apache ferocity was tactical and personal, it was the Comanche's organized, large-scale, and systematic application of violence that ultimately made them the more militarily dominant force of their time on the plains. The history of the American West is filled with forgotten wars and untold stories. If you want to explore more of the conflicts that shaped a continent, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.